Okay, hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're talking about Insecure Season 5, Episode 5. And the theme this episode, shit happens how and when it wants to happen. And this season so far, I feel it's very difficult to end a show like this because it could go on and on. Because it's essentially the development of a person and that's not really something that ends. So either you're feeling quite underwhelmed or you're kind of like, it's going as expected. So it's very difficult to end a show like this with a bang, you know? So I'm interested to see what you guys think. And so the episode starts off with love in the air. We see Molly, she's living her best life. She's giving orders and she's quite literally finding what feels good. And watching her like just relax into herself, not judging anything, just kind of going with the flow has been very refreshing. However, this sort of state of mind is severely disrupted when she gets a bunch of texts and missed calls notifying her that her mother had a stroke. Meanwhile, Nathan and Issa are in bed. And watching Issa in this man's bed is really interesting because there was a time where she was sneaking around this man's room. And I think about that scene often. And now that she's comfortably sitting there, it just brings back some bad memories. So before we get into Nathan and Issa, I want to start with Molly. Molly is triggered. I think this sort of situation with her mother may have started to unravel her a bit. And her sort of reaction or her sort of impulse after hearing this really bad news is to overcompensate, right? She wants to be everywhere for everyone. And this type of sort of reaction will eventually burn you out. So they get to the hospital, and this scene at the hospital was both funny and tragic at the same time. She shows up in her night dress, right? Like she doesn't care, she's fully comfortable. That's the thing, like she was in that dress for a long time and you know, like it is what it is. And so she finds out that her mother had a stroke and they're all kind of sitting there foreshadowing like how bad the situation is even before we find out how bad it is. Her brother is talking about the last time the last thing he said to her. And Molly's really trying to think positively, right? So that's how the episode starts. She's thinking positively. She's like, no, you're still going to have a chance to tell her what you really think. And they kind of escort the family into the room and they mistake Molly's mother for another patient. And the logic that the doctor was saying was like, oh yeah, like sometimes a stroke really ages people. And they're all looking at him, and I thought this was a fun commentary on the healthcare system, just how they rationalize their bad behavior at times. And just as they're leaving the room, I think Molly's brother was like to the other family, like, sorry for your upcoming loss. So there was a lot of like funny little, they kind of weaved in humor, although like highly inappropriate. It was still really funny. And so the first sign that Molly is kind of starting to overcompensate is that she recognizes that her father can't really be the primary point of contact. Like he's kind of overwhelmed, he's shocked, he's in a state of grief. He doesn't want to deal with the details of anything. And Molly kind of recognizes that right away. And so she asks the nurse to kind of, you know, give her information and make her responsible for kind of overseeing everything. And so she takes on this burden while at the same time processing everything that's happening around her. And from that action, things just kind of snowball, right? She starts to, like, it becomes very difficult for Molly to keep up because as soon as she thinks she has all the information, she gets more information that makes it kind of impossible for her to be this person that can kind of take care of everything. And so she takes this responsibility on. And again, they still don't know the severity of the situation. And then she gets a call from work. And this call from work indicated a lot of things for me. Her boss calls her and says, "Where are you?" And she said, "I told my secretary I'd be out. It's a personal issue." And it seems like she was working on a project, like there's something very important that she has to complete at work. And her boss explicitly tells her, like, if you need me to assign this to someone else, just tell me, it's not a big deal. And Molly's reaction is, no, I can do it. And watching Molly at work has been interesting because she went from feeling underappreciated to really kind of going overboard. Like she seems very proactive at work. She seems to be taking on a lot of tasks. But the fact that she was willing to take this on, despite not really being in the right headspace, again, like she's trying to put out that positive energy that everything will be all right and back to normal, but she put herself in a very precarious situation. And this sort of feeling to want to overcompensate and like be everything for everyone is, it's a defense mechanism, and there's a limit, right? Like, it's very good to be open and available to people, but ultimately you can't really help others unless you help yourself first. And so Molly seems to be working backwards here. And I think the breaking point, or the beginning where she kind of realizes, like, damn, maybe I took on way more than I should, is when the doctors kind of accidentally inform her that her mother had a previous stroke beforehand. And the fact that her family didn't tell her that her mother had a stroke suggests a few things. Like, parents, it's nothing personal, right? Like, no one to know it's not personal. Like, sometimes parents think they're protecting you, but they're not. So they probably did it in good faith. However, I think this really affected Molly because her parents also didn't tell her about her father's affair. And she's done so much work on herself, being available, being open, kind of pushing them about the estate. And that was another thing that was really bothering her. Like, they didn't even complete that yet. And so she's been kind of open and available to her family, and yet they didn't give her this news. And her reaction was like, how am I supposed to help you unless you tell me everything, right? Like, you're kind of hindering my ability to help us. But it's like, there's only so much you can do, right? Like, you want to fix it. I think when people go into that mode of wanting to help, they want to fix, right? They want to, like, perfect, and they want to make everything go away. But unfortunately, that has limits. So I think the fact that her parents didn't tell her about her mother's stroke, she took that very personally and sort of started to turn the mirror inwards, right? Like, it must be a reflection of me and something that I'm not doing very well. And so she has a lot of guilt for a lot of things that she can't control. And she has this conversation with Issa, and she feels very guilty, right? And she's basically saying, I was kind of sleeping with a random while my mother was having a stroke, And she kind of regresses back to that first episode where she's talking about, I ran out of time, and, I'm getting old, and I thought, these grandkids, like, her mother wants grandkids, and she wasn't even able to deliver that for her before her stroke. And she's having all these guilt about being a bad daughter, right? Like, being a bad person. And I think when something bad happens, we tend to undermine ourselves because we generally, or at least for me, like, you focus on the negatives. And Issa was kind of looking at her like, no, you have an awesome apartment, a highly intelligent dog that finds his way home. You're a lawyer, like, this is not for nothing. And I think this tendency to undermine ourselves kind of, or pedestalize other lifestyles, or, what we should have instead of, what should have been. We really hurt our own feelings, right? So Molly's feeling a lot of guilt. She kind of, she kind of diminishes herself to a point where, like, she's feeling really awful. And now she's making it a character flaw, right? Like, if only I had kids, and maybe she wouldn't have had a stroke. Like, you get that sense, it's just kind of snowballing in her mind. And following this conversation, I thought it was very appropriate that Issa, like, shortly after, sees Lawrence and Condola. And the way she sees Lawrence and Condola, they look perfect, right? They look like a beautiful family. The baby's cute. And she has no idea about the behind the scenes, the fact that these two can't stand each other, that they're barely co-parenting, like, the amount of, like, ugliness behind the scenes. But Issa doesn't see that. All she sees is perfection. And again, I thought it was appropriate after Molly's conversation in terms of, like, what we should be doing with our lives, and this like, what we kind of assume is ideal, or this pedestalizing of, like, other lifestyles. And in the end, like, we all got problems, and no one's really above anyone else. So Molly's really beating herself up, and I think she totally exhausted herself. So I'm interested to see what the consequences of that will be in terms of work, and in terms of how, inevitably, when they get the news, because her mother's situation has gotten worse and they suspect paralysis. And so it's snowballing faster than she can kind of cope with. And so in the end, you kind of see Molly sitting, and she's deflated, right? She doesn't know what to do. She has no solutions because this is so out of your hands. And ultimately, again, you can't really take care of other people unless you kind of take care of yourself first. So moving on to Issa and Nathan. And man, like, when Issa saw Condola and Lawrence, she was looking at them like, damn, like happy for you. And again, we don't know what happens with people. Like, you should never assume, like, appearances can be deceiving. And the episode starts off with Nathan and Issa, and they're in the room and they're talking, and I was very impressed with Nathan's communication skills. Like, he was very clear, and he was still trying to read her mind. Like, there were times where I sensed he was just saying things that he thought she wanted to hear. And so they wake up in the morning and they're trying to talk about plans, and automatically Issa's communication skills are not great, right? Like, she's kind of like, we could hang out, but if you want you time, like, that's cool, like, that's fine, like, giving him an out. And she's very insecure. That's what I got out of it. Like, she's not confident in asking for exactly what she wants. And Nathan had the good sense to kind of like sense that and be like, we can hang out. And the thing about inconveniencing yourself, or you don't want to inconvenience someone else, that can actually work against you, right? Like, if you're the type of person, I am too, where sometimes you don't want to bother someone, right? You're like, you know what, you finish what you have to do, and it can have the opposite effect, right? Like, people could take that as standoffish, or that you don't really want to hang out with them, or that, you know what I mean? It's like you're finding an excuse, when in fact it's the opposite, right? You're trying to respect their time. So Issa's doing that weird thing where we get it, you're trying to respect this time, but at the same time, like, if somebody did not want you around, you would not be around, right? So Nathan's like, okay, that's fine, we can hang out, it's cool. And then Issa calls Molly to kind of confirm, and then she finds out the situation with Molly, and she goes to the hospital. And just before he drops her off, it's really interesting because, again, throughout the episode, she keeps like making excuses, right? Because he kind of explicitly says, like, call me and I'll pick you up. Like, he's very clear. Like, just call and I'll figure it out. And she's like, no, like, I don't want you to be bothered. I don't want you to be. And I understand that mindset. And it's like, the person is telling you exactly what they think. And still you're like, is that really what they think? You're like doubting transparency. And again, she feels like an inconvenience. Like, she doesn't want to inconvenience or bother him. And the dude is just like, I don't know how else I could communicate this to you. So she gets out of the car and she changes clothes with Molly. And Molly's dress was fire, man. Like, she looked good. I liked Issa's little sweater from her block party. I thought that was cute. And so she switches clothes and she's like, I'll be here for you, And because of that conversation, she calls her own mother, right? Like, everybody started calling their moms and saying, how are you? And the problem with calling your parents is that they don't stop calling, as Issa found out the hard way. So Issa's tasked with going over to Molly's place and making sure everything's okay. And as if she was gonna leave this dog alone. So Molly has a dog, and this dog is like, apparently she just doesn't like this dog very much. And had it not been for Nathan there, they probably wouldn't have walked the dog. Like, she was perfectly willing to just take Molly's clothes and just leave. And I was like, yo, what about the dog? And she's like, he's a house dog. He knows exactly what he's doing. Like, he's not my business. And so they go for this walk, and they have good chemistry. They're joking, they're chilling. And Issa's mom calls, and Issa's mom, again, like, once you call your mom, it's over. Like, they're gonna want to talk forever, and they're gonna want to see you every day of the week. And so Issa calls her mother saying, how are you? We should hang out. And her mother says, sure, we can hang out every weekend for the next 7-8 weeks. And her mom is like, Issa's like, you know what, maybe I called you a little too soon. And the whole time she's kind of conversing with her mother notices that there's somebody around, right? And she asks, like, are you the boyfriend? Like, who are you? And he says yes. And again, it speaks to, like, we can't really control when and how things happen, right? Like, there's an ideal, like, you imagine things to be one way and things just happen, right? You just have to be prepared for them. And even as he was saying it, she was super embarrassed, right? She didn't want to put him in that position. And I couldn't tell if it was because she wasn't sure about him or because she felt like maybe she wasn't good enough for him. Like, I couldn't catch the vibe, because I was like, she's so careful not to, like, bother him too much. And he's like, I want to be bothered, So I don't know where that hesitation was coming from, to be honest. Like, you guys let me know. And so I guess they're boyfriend, girlfriend. And just in that moment, that dog runs loose. And the way Issa just doesn't care about that dog was something else. But we find out that Nathan had a very interesting relationship with his father. So this dog runs away, and he kind of tells a story of how he had a similar situation growing up. And his father basically told him, like, just the relationship between him and his dad didn't seem to be like a very good one. And as he's describing that relationship, I think a lot of millennials can relate, especially like parents. Sometimes this draconian parenting where, you know, I get they're trying to like toughen you up and, you know, take responsibility for your actions, but it's such a, you know, backwards way of doing it. Like I remember one time, I think I told my dad, I don't know, I was depressed about something. And I think he literally told me like Africans don't get depressed. And I had to sort myself out. And I did sort myself out. But like sometimes parents don't know what they're saying. And like it's coming from a good place. But at the same time, you're like, wow, like you were really not cut out for this. So anyway, she's talking to them and he's kind of opening up. And I was very impressed with his communication. He's being very vulnerable and open. And I think he trusts her a lot. And that's what I sensed, but I couldn't tell if she was fully like opening up back. Like she wanted to, but there was so much hesitation. So eventually he says, listen, this dog is eventually gonna come back to the apartment, trust me. And the dog does, and he kind of makes a quip like, you underestimated the dog. Like you need to like give this raggedy dog more credit. And this scene was so awkward for a lot of reasons, right? And they're sitting having a conversation, and at one point Issa says, you know what, you're very patient, that's why I love you. And when she said I love you, it felt like a friend love you. You know, like it was like, that's why I love you. And I couldn't tell, like I think she has love for him, you know, like you guys let me know. And there was a bit where she kind of puts her head on his shoulders and she's kind of like, can I? Like there's that kind of awkward hesitation. And I think Issa wants to move forward, but there's some type of like something holding her back. Whereas Nathan was down. He was like, you know, like we're Gucci. We communicated. We're boyfriend, girlfriend. Like it's on you to sort yourself out. And I think seeing Condola and Lawrence may have actually motivated her to move forward with Nathan, because there is something holding her back. I think when you've been in a long-term relationship like that with someone, it's very hard to move on, because she looked at Condola, she looked at Lawrence, she's probably thinking that should have been my baby, that should have been my life. And it's very hard not to let that image go, right? And so I think maybe that disappointment or that kind of, you know, like acceptance is slowly coming in. So overall, I thought it was a very good episode. Again, this season, I'm not sure how they end the season. You know, I feel like either it'll disappoint you or you already kind of accepted that it's going to end how it's going to end. But you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.